Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Merlin, Season 2, Episode 2, Sweet Dreams. The episode in a nutshell is a brief summary of what happened within this episode. So the episode begins with five kings arriving for a peace conference, which Uther warns Arthur will either end in a peace treaty for their mutual prosperity, but should it fail, the result most likely will be war, which of course he doesn't want. However, among the incoming kings, Elined and his jester Trickler have a plan to start a war because they do want war, not peace, because Elined feels that he will be richer through war than he would and poorer through peace. Among the kings also is Olaf and his daughter Vivian, who he has brought with him and is known to be incredibly overprotective of. So Arthur brings Vivian to her room and introduces Gwen, who's going to be looking after her while she's staying there. And she's immediately rude about the room, about Gwen. And so later, when Arthur's in his rooms, Merlin kind of teases him about Vivian, but Arthur says that, she may be beautiful, but she's incredibly rude and not his type, obviously because Gwen is his type. And then there is an opening celebration where everybody's at the dining hall and Vivian and Morgana are sitting together. Trickler comes in doing some magic tricks, pretending that they're more magician rather than sorcerer, though he is revealed to be a sorcerer. And he first blows fire to light a bunch of candles in front of Uther and Arthur at the head of the table, or it's kind of like a horseshoe tape, like long table. And then he says he has something special for the ladies, and then he makes a bunch of butterflies appear, and then goes over to Vivian and pretends to pull one out from her ear while also pulling out a lock of her hair, which he then takes. We then see Trickler and Aliened in Aliened's rooms, and Trickler casts an enchantment using Vivian's hair, and he basically pours an eye drop potion into Arthur's sleeping eyes and puts Vivian's hair under the pillow. And when Arthur wakes up, he's fully in love with Vivian and asks Merlin to get her flowers and write a heartfelt note. But Merlin, not aware of the change in his affections, gives the flowers a note to Gwen instead, and then only later finds out that it was meant to go to Vivian. Arthur then goes to Vivian's rooms that night and is soundly rejected by Vivian, who is completely uninterested in him and threatens to basically tell her father. This, of course, humiliates Arthur, who then goes to bed, but Aliened and Trickler are shocked because everybody's attracted to Arthur. They didn't realize they had to enchant both of them. So, with one day left in the peace talks, or is it 2 days? Well, anyways, with short amount of time left in the peace talks, they then, while Vivian is sleeping, go in. Okay, so first Trickler takes a piece of Arthur's hair while he's sleeping, then goes in while Vivian is sleeping and uses the eye drop potion on her and then puts Arthur's hair under her pillow. So then the next day she wakes up and also has feelings for Arthur. So she goes running to his room to try to woo him. While Trickler goes to the meeting where all the kings are and tips Olaf off. Luckily, Merlin's on it and he puts Vivian to sleep and hides her away in the wardrobe so that, when Olaf comes searching Arthur's rooms, he does not find her and he apologizes for the misunderstanding before he leaves. And Merlin then takes Vivian back to her room where she falls asleep. Meanwhile, Gwen, who has received the flowers and note in error, leaves a note for Arthur asking to meet at sunset and that she'll be waiting. And so again, he assumes this is from Vivian. So he then escapes from his room, crawls up the side of the castle, and gets into her room where they then have like their, oh my gosh, we're fated to be together. We love each other so much. And of course, Trickler has once again, alongside Aliened, tipped off Olaf, who does go into his daughter's rooms and finds her with Arthur and immediately challenges him to a battle to the death for compensation or recompense. And then the next day, the fight starts, and it's 3 rounds with 3 different weapons, battles to the death. But because Arthur's head is in the clouds, because he's got this enchantment, he's losing even with weapons that he's known to be best at. Starts with the staff and then the mace, which is his forte, according to him, he loses. And then the last round is the sword. Gwen, of course, is heartbroken at this point because she thinks Arthur loves Vivian. But Merlin runs to find her, basically after finding out that the enchantment can be broken with a true love's kiss, or rather, a kiss for the person he actually currently loves. You know, the fairy tale type kiss. And Merlin goes to Gwen, says Arthur's enchanted, has Gwen search her heart to know that his feelings for her were real, and asks her to kiss him to break the enchantment so that he stands a chance in the last round of winning. Gwen works up the courage, goes into the tent, kisses Arthur, which breaks the enchantment. Arthur comes out of it, is like, what am I doing? Goes to the final round, which is swords, ends up winning, but instead of killing Olaf, he says that this is no way to create peace, and basically ends the duel there as the winner ultimately. Meanwhile, unfortunately, Vivian is still enchanted because no one is there to break her enchantment, so Olaf, in the end, as the kings are leaving with peace secured, basically tells Uther that Arthur has a wise head on his shoulders and that Vivian is just as much to blame and that he will take her from temptation and is taking her away from Camelot before leaving with everything settled. And then Arthur goes to Gwen to apologize to her for basically any hurt that he may have caused by this enchantment to Vivian, assuring her that none of his feelings for Vivian was real. And she says that she knows that, but that there is going to one day be a princess that he falls in love with because he is the king and she cannot be his queen. And as they both are aware of this, basically ends the relationship there, and that's how it ends. Bringing us to the part of the video where we are going to be ranking the episode on our mostly objective ranking event list and then also the personal ranking list. So on the the mostly objective rank values list, I highlighted those I felt applied to this episode. And in first, we have, of course, our single episode supporting character introductions, and we have 4 characters that played a significant role within this episode that are only within this episode. So the first is, of course, Alien Ed, who is trying to sabotage the peace. Trickler, his jester, who also happens to be a sorcerer, who does the enchanting of Arthur and Vivian. We then have Olaf, Vivian's overprotective father, who challenges Arthur to a duel when he finds out about their relationship, if you can call it that. And then, of course, Vivian, who is the target of Arthur's enchantment and then later enchanted to reciprocate. And while Arthur's enchantment is broken, hers is not. They're worth 1 point each, so that brings us up to 4 so far. We then have a bit of world building where we learn that Camelot is surrounded by 5 other kingdoms, and then they are all coming together for a peace conference to create a peace treaty so that they can avoid war, which is apparently unprecedented according to Uther, and something that they really want to go through. And that brings us to 8 points. Then we have our main relationship development, which is, of course, Gwen's kiss breaking Arthur's enchantment, showing that they do have true feelings for each other, and that Arthur's feelings for her were real, because otherwise it would not have been able to break the enchantment. And that's also worth 4 points, bringing us to 12 points total for this episode positively. However, we do have a negative, and that, of course, is the main relationship regression or breakup, which is when Arthur goes to apologize to Gwen, and then Gwen rejects him on the basis of they are too different. They know that it's not going to work. She can't be the queen, etc., etc. And so that, of course, sets them back again, which brings this episode to a 9 out of 10 overall. And so our season 2 rankings so far on our mostly objective ranking. In first place, we have the Once and Future Queen. This episode comes in second, Sweet Dreams. Then we have The Lady of the Lake, The Curse of Cornelius Sagan, The Sins of the Father, The Nightmare Begins, Lancelot and Guinevere, Beauty and the Beast, and then currently in last is The Witchfinder. So now that brings us to the personal ranking, and I really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was really great. I liked the whole comedy that came from Arthur and Vivian being enchanted. I also liked how romantic it was, that it was true love's kiss that broke it. Though, as always, I'm not a fan of Gwen and Arthur's relationship in this show. I do still like the concept of a true love's kiss breaking a evil spell. Very fairy tale-esque. I do think it was a pity that there was no one to kiss Vivian and break her enchantment, so now she's stuck with false feelings, presumably forever, which sucks. With the comedy, there was a little bit of secondhand embarrassment, but only briefly. So I think I can overlook that. I also want to call out the fact that for the first time probably ever in this series, Merlin actually took Kilgara's advice. When he can't find a way in his magic book to break the enchantment, he goes to visit Kilgara in the cave, and Kilgara basically says the enchantment's too strong, it has a hold of his heart, the only thing that can break it is a stronger love, a truer love that's not enchanted, so you have to find the person, Arthur loves in order to break the enchantment. And then Merlin does and goes and finds Gwen to go kiss Arthur. So usually I point out that Merlin goes to Kogara for advice and then does like absolutely nothing that Kogara tells him to do. And it's very frustrating because it's like, why bother going to somebody if you're not going to listen to them? And finally, he's listened and it's milestone. It's amazing. I'm very proud of the fact that he's finally listening to the advice that the dragon is giving him, especially since he keeps going there. I thought it was an incredible moment. And then, of course, we have all like the fighting and stuff like that, which wasn't as fun. Um, but yeah, I feel like this episode was more about the comedic shenanigans of this enchantment, and I think that it worked for that reason. There was, I do kind of, okay, so one thing that's true, not just of this show, but many others as well, is that they create this like extended universe around the kingdoms, and then they'll introduce like a single episode character, like in this one, but then it's like there are other kingdoms all around. For example, in another episode, I can't remember which one, but we met a king of one of the other kingdoms, and yet that actor obviously doesn't reprise the role here. And I feel like if you're going to have a character like a king of a neighboring kingdom that you may have peace talks with or treaties with, then maybe they should like, I don't know, when they're making the contracts for the actors, leave open the possibility of them recurring on or reprising the role just because it makes it more believable. Because here we have two kings of two supposedly neighboring kingdoms that we will never see again because they were in one episode. And I feel like that's a bit of a shame. And then we've had kings before that were supposedly from neighboring kingdoms. There's 5 of them. We've met the previous king, and yet again he doesn't reprise his role. So it's like it kind of loses the suspension of disbelief in this universe that, these supposedly very important political figures don't recur when there is opportunity for them to do so, like in the case of this conference. The previous king that we had met of a neighboring kingdom could then have come back. and it would have just added some realism because we're reintroducing that this is a king and he's part of the Five Kingdoms and he's now part of this peace treaty. I wish I remembered his name. Oh, who was it? Bayard. It was Bayard. King Bayard of Mercia. Mercia has been said to be one of these neighboring kingdoms. So if he's inviting the five neighboring kingdoms, Bayard also would have been invited. And yet the actor who played Bayard did not recur in this scene, and that just kind of, left that suspension of disbelief impacted. And again, King Ilianed and King Olaf, they don't reoccur either. And I feel like I said, it's not just this show, but there are many shows where it's kind of like, if you're going to create this extended universe outside of like the main role, if you're bringing in people of significance that may need to be dealt with again, like for example, Camelot interacting with these other kingdoms, then the people you have as the head of state of those kingdoms maybe make sure that they're able to come back and recur so that you can add more realism to your universe. But like I said, it's not just this show's problem. So again, I can overlook that. And so overall, I liked the episode. I liked the overall concept. I like that he finally listened to Kolgara after like putting us through him asking for advice and then completely disregarding it time and time again. Love that he's finally actually listening. And the comedy was amazing. So I decided to give it an 8 out of 10, as obviously there were some negatives too. Like, I'm not a big fan of Gwen and Arthur, so that didn't really make much. There was some secondhand embarrassment going on, which I wasn't overly fond of. And so, season 2 ranking so far in our personal ranking, with this one being an 8 out of 10, we have in first place The Lady of the Lake. Second, The Nightmare Begins. This episode comes in third, Sweet Dreams. The Curse of Cornelius Sagan, Beauty and the Beast. The Sins of the Father, The Witchfinder, Lancelot and Guinevere, and currently in last position for me personally, The Once and Future Queen. Which now brings us over to our series ranking so far. And on our mostly objective ranking, season 1 ended with a score of 69.23%. And so far, season 2 has 58 points out of a possible 120. Season 1 on the personal ranking ended with a score of 66.92%. And season 2 so far has a score of 60 out of 120. And with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Merlin Season 2, Episode 9, Sweet Dreams. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.